Now, we go to the next section. That is 1.8. 1.8, Chapter 1, Section 8. We already know how to do a simple linear equation. In this chapter, we talk about quadratic equations. Quadratic equation is when you have expression, algebraic expression, or polynomial of the second degree set equal to 0. That would give you a quadratic equation. A general form of a quadratic equation is, again, it says a quadratic equation in the variable x in any equation is an equation that can be written in this form, right? Ax to the second plus bx plus c equals 0. A should not be equal to 0. A is the coefficient of x squared. If this is 0, that term would disappear. So this would be a linear equation after all. But a not being equal to 0 is the only condition. In other words, b can be 0 and c can be 0. You have no problem with them being 0. There are basically three ways of solving a quadratic equation. The first one is solving by factoring. We already studied how to factor a polynomial, right? Either we use the rules or we go by trial and error. So solving by factoring, it says we use the zero factor property, which says if a times b is equal to 0, then either a is equal to 0 or b is equal to 0. We have seen this before. So it says solve 2x squared plus 5x minus 3 equals 0, right? So we're going to factor this. So how do we factor this? Two parentheses, using trial and error, should equal 0. I have 2x squared, so I have a 2x here. You have an x here, right? Then a minus 3 here. A minus 3. How would you get a minus 3? Right? There is a minus 1 times the 3. They give you minus 3. There is a 1 times minus 3, which would also give you a minus 3. So it's one of these two. There's no other option. So I go ahead and put them into the equation, see which one solve. And also, since I have a 2x here on the left-hand side, on the first parenthesis, and x here, it makes a difference whether minus 1 comes here or it will come here. So I'm going to start with the first one. I put minus 1 here and a plus 3 here. That's this first one. That will still give me a minus 3 here. So let's say if I come up with the middle term being 5. So you have 2x now times 3, that is 6x, minus 1 times x, that's minus x. So 6x positive minus 1x would give me 5x. Lucky. I got lucky again. So that would give me 5x. So this is correct. This is correct. Then I use this property that says if a times b is equal to 0, either a is equal to 0 or b is equal to 0. So you have two terms multiplied by each other equals 0. So I say either 2x minus 1 is equal to 0 or x plus 3 is equal to 0. So 2x minus, this is now linear. 2x minus 1 equals 0. That means 2x is equal to 1. That means x is equal to 1/2. X plus 3, I'm sorry, this is 0. X plus 3 equals 0. That means x is equal to minus 3. So this quadratic equation has two answers. X equal minus 3 and x equal 1/2. You plug either one of these to the left-hand side of this equation would be equal to 0. Right? That's the answer to this equation. 2h minus 1 times h plus 3, that's factoring. Either one of them equal to 0 based on this property. Then h would be equal to 1/2 or h equal minus 3. So either one of those would solve, would have the left-hand side equal to the right-hand side. Keep the equation true. Another way of solving for a quadratic equation is by completing the square. By completing the square. Okay? So here's a quadratic equation equals 0. Right? Instead of factoring this, we're going to complete the square. Let me do that again first before we get to this point. The way you complete the square, you take the coefficient of x here, the middle term, the coefficient of x, divided by 2 and square it. So here is 12 is the coefficient. 12 divided by 2, then square it. 12 divided by 2 is 6. 6 squared is equal to what? 36. Then this 36 should be added to both sides of an equation. But before I do that, I take this constant to the right-hand side. So I'm going to rewrite this. It would be x squared plus 12x equal plus 10 to go to the right-hand side, they become minus 10. Now I'm going to add 36 to both sides. X squared plus 12x plus 36 equal minus 10 plus 36. Now this on the left-hand side, this is a complete square. This is a complete square. And this complete square is x. Since this is plus, it would be a plus. Square root of that, which is 6, then squared. Okay? Since I square this here, that would be only 6. Equal, minus 10 plus 36 is plus 26. Now, I go and take the square root of both sides. I go take the square root of both sides. Square root of x plus 6 squared would be x plus 6. Equal. When I take the square root on both sides, on the outside I have to remember to put a plus or minus. So it would be plus or minus square root of 26. Now I take 6 to the other side. X would be equal to, plus 6 goes to the other side, they become minus 6, plus or minus square root of 26. That is the answer. Actually, again, two answers. One of them is minus 6 plus the square root of 26. The other one is minus 6 minus the square root of 26. That would be the answer to this equation. Okay. So remember this answer, write it someplace. So let me check and see whether we have done it right. Okay. So remember all the steps. I take this coefficient, 12, divided by 2, then square it, then add that 36 to both sides of my equations, right? And work my way down. Put it in the form of h squared plus mh equal n, which basically means take the constant to the right-hand side. That's all it means. So they did that. Take the constant minus 10 to the right-hand side. Next, add m divided by 2 squared to both sides. M is talking about the coefficient of x, which is 12. and 12 divided by 2 squared. We did that. That would be 6 squared, which is 36, right? So 36 added to both sides. We did that. Now factor x plus m divided by 2 squared, right? So this would be x plus 6 squared, x plus 6 squared equal m divided by 2. This is m. 12 divided by 2 is 6, right? 6 plus n, and since it was minus 10, that would be equal to 26. Okay? I think maybe this is kind of a mistake in the formula here. This has to have square around it. That's what this 36 is. Now the h is equal to minus m divided by 2. Again, you take the square root of both sides, and it would be minus 6 plus or minus 26. I think this on the left-hand side is a little bit too confusing. If you follow, well, number one, take the constant. This is the constant to the right-hand side. Number two, take this coefficient divided by 2, then square it, add that to both sides, and now on the left-hand side you would have a complete square, which is the square root of this goes here, and equal 26. Now take the square root from both sides. Take the square root from both sides with a, not forgetting to put a plus or minus in front of that. That's where this plus or minus come from. And then you can solve it using completing the square. One more way of solving a quadratic equation is using a quadratic formula. Quadratic formula. So it says if ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, with a not being equal to 0, with a, b, and c real numbers, then x would be equal to minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Again, a, b, and c are what you have in your equation. You plug in and you get the answer. Not very difficult to you have the formula in front of you. You can plug in the stuff and get your answer, right? Now using quadratic formula for this. So let me write the quadratic formula. X equal minus b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c divided by 2a. Again, this is your a, this is your b, this is your c. So you can plug in, you can plug in numbers in there. So minus b is talking about b is plus 7, minus b is minus 7, plus or minus square root of b squared, that is 7 squared is 49, minus 4 is a constant, times a, coefficient of h squared, which is 3, times c, which is 1, divided by 2 times a is 3. So x therefore is equal to minus 7 plus or minus square root of 49 minus 4 times 3 times 1 is minus 12 divided by 6 I'll just erase a bit of it. So minus 7 plus or minus the square root of 49 minus 12 is 37 divided by 6. Okay. So that's basically the answer. Two answers. One is minus 7 plus square root of 37. Let me write this down. One is minus 7 plus square root of 37 divided by 6. The other one is minus 7 minus square root of 37 divided by 6. You have two distinct answers here. Again, once you have the formula in front of you, all you have to do is to plug in numbers and add and subtract. So it's not really, should not be really a big deal of using the formula. Let's see what they have done here. Note the value A is 3, B is 7, C is 1. So plug in and simplify. So they plugged in everything here. Simplify, which is the same thing, minus 7 plus or minus the square root of 37 divided by 6. That is the answer. Not very different from the way we did it. Two separate answers. These are the only two answers which would satisfy this equation. Now here is something about when a quadratic equation has an answer, when quadratic equation doesn't have an answer, when quadratic equation has two answers, such as this previous case. It has to do with what is called the discriminant. The discriminant. The quantity b squared minus 4ac. Remember, this is in the formula, b squared minus 4ac. This is what you have. This is what you have in your quadratic equation, right? This one. This under the square root. This is called the discriminant. Three things can happen to this discriminant. The discriminant, which is under the radical, can be positive. Well, if it is positive, such as the example we just did, if it is positive, then the equation has two distinct answers because of this plus or minus here. You would have two answers. This discriminant can be equal to 0. If it is 0, then plus or minus 0 does not mean anything. The answer to your quadratic equation would only be minus b divided by 2a. And finally, the discriminant can be negative. If the discriminant is negative, since you cannot take the square root of a negative number, then the equation does not have any real answer. So that's the bit about the discriminant. Let's go and read, and read this. The quantity b squared minus 4ac under the radical sign is called the discriminant. If the discriminant is positive, the equation has two real solutions. If the discriminant is negative, the equation has no real solution. If the discriminant is 0, the equation has only one real solution. Okay? So you have to remember that. Let me do this. Let's say I have x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 0. This is a quadratic equation, right? So what is the discriminant here? The discriminant, which was b squared minus 4ac, right? B squared, b is 2, 2 squared minus 4 times a is 1 times c, which is also 1. So 2 squared is 4. 4 times 1 is 4. So this is equal to 0. So the discriminant in this case for this equation is equal to 0. So that means this equation has only one answer, right? And it's clear why it would have one answer, because this is a complete square. H squared plus 2h plus 1 is actually h plus 1 squared equals 0. When you take the square root of both sides, you get what? You get h plus 1 equal 0. Therefore, x is equal to what? Minus 1. Only one answer. No plus or minus here. The only answer for this equation is 1. Oh, minus 1, I'm sorry. It's minus 1. Okay? Let's have another. Put this on the side. Let's have another one. H squared plus 4 equals 0. This is a quadratic equation, right? Quadratic equation. What is the discriminant here? Again, b squared minus 4 times a times c. B squared, the middle term where you have h. Well, there is no h. So b squared in this case is actually 0. So 0 squared minus 4 times a. How much is a? 1, 1. And c is 4. So it would be equal 0 squared is 0. So minus 4 times 1 times 4 is what? Minus 16. So the discriminant in this case for this equation, the discriminant is negative. The discriminant being negative, if you remember, if the discriminant is negative, there is no answer to this equation. And clearly you can see there is no answer. There is no value you can plug in for x. So the left-hand side ends up being 0. Another way you could solve this, to solve it, instead of using the formula which would give you this, another way we can solve this is to say take the 4 to the other side, so you have h squared equal to minus 4. Now you take the square root from both sides. Whoops, this is a negative number. You cannot take the square root of it. So there is no answer. And we could see there is no answer because the discriminant ends up being a negative number. So if the discriminant is negative number, you cannot have any answer. Okay. Let me just check one more thing, make sure there is nothing here that we need to deal with in this section.